Well, hey there, it's Liz Rohr from Real World NP, and you are watching the Real World NP YouTube channel. We make weekly episodes to help save you time, frustration, and help you take the best care of your patients. Oh my goodness, I can't wait to share this episode with you. So this is a recorded interview that I did with Terra Anderson. They are a non-binary therapist, somatic therapist that also has a second company, an educational company specifically for healthcare providers to help with queer competency. And we just had a really wonderful conversation. It's been a long time coming, talking about health as it relates to our LGBTQIA plus patients. And this conversation is actually a really foundational place to start. So I got a lot of questions, and when I was asking, I reached out to audience members on the email list. If you want to get on the email list, you can submit your questions too. And I think what we realized when we looked at all the questions that people had, we really just had to start in a really foundational place. And so in this interview, we talk about what queer competency means, what people think it is versus what it actually is, and some really practical things to help provide very supportive and holistic care to our LGBTQIA patients, right? And it's like the starting place to start with is this episode, this interview, really some core foundational pieces of information and some resources to learn a little bit more further. So without further ado, I'm going to share my interview. Actually, real quick, if you haven't grabbed the ultimate resource guide for the new NP, head over to realworldnp.com/guide. You will get all of these episodes sent straight to your inbox every week so you don't miss a thing. And you'll also get patient stories, notes from me, and bonuses I truly don't share anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and here is our interview. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Terra Anderson. I use they, them pronouns. I am a gender equity educator. I work primarily with healthcare and helping providers who want to better serve the LGBTQIA community. I'm also a therapist by training, somatic therapist. So I work with LGBTQIA folks around areas of intimacy and identity.
That's awesome. And how did you get into this path?
It's a great question. Well, I wanted to be a therapist my whole life.
Cool.
Yeah. And so I really beelined it for this profession. And once I got there, what I realized was that this fantasy that I had about helping professions is really, how do I want to say this? Informed by systems of power and oppression. And I kind of had this fantasy shatter a little bit early on in my career. And I started to work in community mental health. I was just seeing how many LGBTQIA folks were not being served in a way that made therapy really accessible to them. In my own experience as a trans person, I'm seeing and existing in healthcare spaces where I either don't feel met or my community members are reporting feeling like they're not being seen by their providers and really getting turned off from accessing help.
Yeah.
Right. So a number of series of events happened, and between feeling like tokenized in the work that I was doing, witnessing really well-meaning colleagues just missing the boat, not because their hearts were in the wrong place, but just because they didn't have the education, I decided to go out on my own and start an organization really dedicated to bridging the gap between the training that healthcare and helping providers get in serving the LGBTQIA community and what we really need.
I love that. And your company is called Embody Emerge.
Yep, Embody Emerge.
Beautiful. And you're on Instagram, so you should
I
be
am
there.
at Embody Emerge.
Excellent. So how does it work with how do you help healthcare providers to bridge that gap in that separate company?
Yeah. So I think I take a different approach than a lot of LGBTQIA training. I think a lot of training goes into kind of the basics, the 101, learning
Mm,
about the LGBTQIA community, terms, fluency, pronouns, language, all of that stuff.
yeah.
And I want to take us a little bit deeper. And
Hmm.
so the work that I do has a couple of different approaches that I think are different than most places. One, I'm really interested in helping folks do their personal work to see
Mm,
themselves. I
hmm.
think that if our providers had a better understanding of their own gender experience, of their own sexual orientations, of how the scripts of society inform those things and are playing out in our medical professions, that
Mm,
LGBTQIA people would have better experiences. And so I want to support healthcare providers to do that personal work, to see
yeah.
themselves. And so beyond just the 101 stuff, we go into our own conditioning, right?
Yeah.
And starting to break apart and really see the ways in which we've been fed heteronormativity. Um,
Yeah.
and I also center the body. I'm a somatic practitioner. So I'm really interested in taking us a level deeper than the general conversation around bias, because it's really hard to
Mm,
see what we can't really acknowledge,
hmm.
and the things that are underneath the level of our consciousness. But our
Hmm.
bodies tell us about those things.
100%.
Right. And
Yeah.
so as a somatic practitioner, we get to really look at like, how is your body telling you where your biases live so
Hmm.
that you have
Mm.
a better chance of recognizing them.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because before we started recording, we were talking about what people think, and your course is called,
Queer
remind me again,
competency.
queer
Yeah.
competency. Okay, I just didn't know if
Mhm.
it had other things attached to it. But you and I were talking about before we started recording queer competency and like what it, and you've kind of already touched on it, but I think that there's this discrepancy for a lot of healthcare providers of what queer competency in terms of, my people are healthcare providers, primary care providers, but like there's a discrepancy between what's being taught in school and what people think queer competency is and what it actually is. So can you kind of like bottom line what you see as the difference between what people think queer competency is and what it actually is?
Mhm. I think that
I mean, bottom line, like that's a lot to pack into one sentence, but if you could simplify it just for conceptual purposes.
um it's not a really simple concept, so
Yeah.
it'll take a little bit of embellishment to do it
Oh,
justice.
no, no, that's fine. Take your time to explain, but I just mean like, yeah, just like for
Yeah,
like boundaries around the grasping. Yeah.
absolutely. And I'll distill it down as much as I can. So I think what a lot of people think of when they think of LGBTQIA competency or queer competency is they're really thinking about pronouns, they're thinking about bathrooms, they're thinking about not saying the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's really about our words and our
Mm-hmm.
communication of our ideas about gender and sexual orientation. It's really for, I think, a lot of people, folks stop at, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
do harm. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so what can I say? How do I act
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
is going to make LGBTQIA people feel safe around me?
Yeah.
And they stop there at definitions, at terms, at pronouns, at bathrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation is actually much deeper. My favorite saying around queer competency is that it's not a destination you will ever reach.
Love
It's the
that.
journey that you travel.
I love
Okay.
that.
So it's not like oh yeah, I checked all of these boxes. I know how to ask for pronouns. I know how to not assume gender identity when I see somebody. Um, we're not checking boxes. We're actually continuing to audit ourselves, continuing to interrogate our conditioning and the world around us so that we can create safer spaces, right?
Totally.
Ongoing. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's like, I think just like having had my own experiences, like going through dismantling, decolonizing, kind of like identifying of like different oppressive structures, like you were kind of talking about in the beginning of like going through that. Like, I think that I can recognize now on the other side that there's like what people call performative, like what's performative of like, what is the thing we're showing versus what's like actually truly true transformation into like understanding, learning. And then it comes to be in individuals. Like you have to start with yourself first and like be included in this whole conversation about gender and sexuality and all of that stuff. Am I reflecting that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to, just underline that it's not about not doing or saying the wrong thing, right? It's actually about taking a very active stance in the way in which you show up as in your humanity. So it's really deeper, like relationship things, like making your subconscious conditioning more conscious around gender and sexual orientation. It's really around, being engaged in the process versus going for perfection. It's really around, making the work of queer competency about you and assessing your own, biases, right?
Totally.
Beyond just like getting the pronouns right.
Totally. Oh, I love that. Pause for a second. I want to pull up my questions. I'm just trying to decide next directions.
Yeah.
We'll go into your favorite part. Does that sound good?
My favorite part.
Yeah.
Of
your favorite. What do you love most about your favorite part of what you do? Do you want to do that one?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Totally.
Okay. So next question. What do you love most about your job, and what is your or your favorite thing about it, or thing to do about it?
This might sound a little sadistic. I love melting people's brains. Truly, there's so the thing about gender is that it is so intricately woven into the fabric of our society that we think we know from a very early age what it means.
Yeah.
And so part of the work that I do is separating some of those deeply implicit narratives that we've been fed our whole lives about gender and sexual orientation, and making them really explicit and showing people like what the constructs are that are operating under the surface.
Yeah.
And when we do that, I mean, the number one, and maybe we'll get into this more in the conversation. If not, I've got loads of material out there that people can digest on their own time, but really separating the difference between biological sex, our anatomy and our physiology, gender, our internal sense of self, and sexual orientation, which is about attraction and arousal. And if we're able to really separate those paradigms, we can see more people for who they are, rather than conflating, the body parts a person has says something about their gender, how they express their gender says something about their sexual orientation. All of that is false. Totally. But we're taught that. So when we really break that down in my work, it shifts the way people see each other, and it shifts the way folks see themselves. Yeah. And that's my favorite part, is opening folks up to more opportunities to see themselves and one another in deeper ways.
Totally. Oh, I love that so much. I'm going to pause again. I'm sorry. I got like very little sleep last night. I have a back thing going on, and
I said that. Oh,
it's all good, but I'm just like, I normally am able to like keep up, and I'm just like, I just need some pauses here.
Totally fine.
Like the holding of two spaces, because I like want to get into this like conversation with you, and I'm like thinking about the NPs, and I'm like, where are they at right now, and what are they, like what's going on with that, and it's just hard to hold both right now.
Yeah, well, we can go into more specifics for them if that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like, I mean, I just don't want to like, beat over the head. It's like, what is your pet peeve about healthcare providers? And it's like, I mean, it's like the same thing. It's like the work, do the work, right? I mean, unless you want to like go other places with that.
I can say something more specific. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like, what do you wish healthcare providers knew?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. Okay. So next question. What do you wish that healthcare, so the people that I work with, that I serve are primary care providers, nurse practitioners, physician associates. Those are the main people, or students. And so and I think like you kind of captured this already. There's a lot of people who are very like well-intentioned and want to do a good job. They don't want to mess up. They have desires to help their patients be really feel welcomed and included.
Mm-hmm.
So like they're coming from that context, and we've already talked about how it's like it's more than just doing it right, quote unquote, getting it right, on that level. But like, what are like with those contexts in mind, like what are some things you wish healthcare providers and students knew or did differently? Or your pet, also like the other way I ask specialists when I do interviews is pet peeves. So like they tend to wrap in together. Your
Yeah,
choice.
absolutely. I think if there was one thing that I could ask folks to do, it would be just don't assume. Don't assume a person's gender. Don't assume what pronouns they use. Don't assume the sexual orientation. Don't assume the relationship structures that they exist in. Right? So when a new patient comes in, you ask those questions.
Yeah.
What pronouns do you use? How do you describe your gender identity? What is your, relationship structure?
Yeah.
Are you monogamous, polyamorous? If you need to know that information.
Oh, I love that phrasing as what did you say, your relationship structure? I love that.
Yeah, structure or relationship orientation.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I think there's hesitation. It just like I just thinking of the nurse practitioner mentees I've worked with and colleagues, like I feel like there's a lot of hesitation to ask that question because they just don't want to offend people. Like, and because sometimes people will tell me, and I've seen this myself too, and patients are like, what do you mean? What are my pronouns? Patients who are not like accustomed to thinking about that. And I think that's just part of it. Like we just have to normalize, like we just have to do it. We just have to normalize these conversations with all of our patients and not just guessing like, oh, maybe I'll ask this person what their pronouns are, right? Like I think that I hear a bit of that too. So yeah, just normalizing those conversations and having those specific languaging pieces, which is part of it, but then also like changing the paradigm and perspective to expect that. We're just gonna like the new baseline is like we have no assumptions. We're just gonna ask versus like, oh, most people are straight or most people are cisgendered. Like no, like we have no idea. Just looking at a person.
Yeah, absolutely. So the two guidelines I would offer with that, one, only ask the questions that you need to know, right? If it's not pertinent to a person's health records that what relationship orientation they have, don't ask, right? Unless you're just trying to get to know somebody and you have that rapport already and you're chatting it up, whatever.
Yeah.
Around the gender piece, the pronouns piece, I do agree with you. I feel like you should ask everyone. If you're going to use a pronoun for somebody, ask. If you've got it down to only use that person's name and you never use a pronoun, then what does it matter?
Yeah.
But and most/all people will use pronouns. It's just habitual language. And so you must ask. And there are going to be some people who get offended by that. And so have a pithy statement in your back pocket for why it's important. Just like you would if you're asking for STI history or, pregnancy history or, history of hypertension or whatever it is that you're asking about. If someone gets like, what do you mean? Like there's something that you're going to come to with compassion and understanding of why you need that information.
Totally. Yeah, totally. I love that. And yeah, most of the time in terms of relationship structures, it's in the context of like a physical exam where you're getting to know a person. It's relevant to potential screenings or support or anything like that. Yeah, but also just if they're coming in for, I don't know, respiratory infection, it's probably not a relevant question.
Totally. Also, frame the questions that you ask in a way that doesn't inherently assume. So a lot of times I'll go in for, let's say, like pelvic exam or something like that. And I get asked the question, do you sleep with men or women? There's, I mean, I understand the heart in that. They don't want to assume that I'm heterosexual or that I'm queer, right? But there's also assumptions embedded in that question.
100%.
That one, there's a binary.
Yep.
Two, I want to have sex with anybody. You know, three, that like most of my partners are non-binary. So my answer to that question is neither. But that also doesn't give you the information that you're trying to get, right?
Exactly.
So what actually do you need to know in asking that question? Do you my guess is that you need to know what fluids I've been exposed to. Right?
Yep.
You know, like that's the important thing. So ask about that.
Yeah.
Right?
What fluids have you been exposed to? In Spanish or Portuguese or Thai? Yeah.
Obviously putting it in context that like makes sense. Thank you. Yeah.
Totally. So I'm going to pause just to ask you, Tara, do you want to comment on, let me just look at the questions again. Let's see. Do you want to stick to the questions that are in the email, or do you want to ask more, I don't know, like directed questions, or like the talking about the short patients for a short period of time? Like, I think so, I guess, and we can include this in the recording, is the question of the scenario, because I'm trying not to like push you into like more answers where it's like, oh, just the superficial stuff, you know. But I think a lot of nurse practitioners worry about in the interim. Okay, so maybe I can put this in the recording. I want to ask your permission first though, but so most people are in a place as a nurse practitioner, the context is that they are really overwhelmed by the medical learning. And then they're also trying to make a really big impact in the world, and they want to take really amazing care of their patients. And also it's like this saturation point of like, yes, this is a problem. Yes, I need to get that deep process to get to that, on that journey. And also like I don't want to like hurt somebody right now when I have to talk about PAP screenings for transmasculine patients or things like that, like things that are very sensitive body wise. Do you want to get into that at all for specifics? Or okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, go with your intuition and I'll just follow you, and I'll answer superficially if it feels right, and I'll go deeper if I want to.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Okay. So recorder, we can, or video editor, we can start again. So I have another question. So, yeah, I think for one of the questions that I get a lot from nurse practitioners is they want to be really sensitive. They are like working on developing their competency. And as they're in that journey, they're also worried about the specific topic of doing screenings for different patients. So one that came up a lot when I was talking to nurse practitioners in the audience was about things like PAP screenings for transmasculine patients or other types of sensitive exams. Do you have any things you want to add or comment on or talk about as it relates to that specific scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate the sensitivity and also the very steep learning curve.
Yeah.
I think the place to start, if folks were gonna like go do a little personal reflection, is really like, what are the assumptions that are made when I am offering a PAP, right? and getting in front of those and actually asking questions to create more safety with the patient. So one example is a lot of people assume that because I learned these terms in my medical school, that those are the terms I should use for a person's body. That can be really dysphoria inducing. And so you might actually ask your clients or your patients, what terms do you like to use for your body as I'm describing what I see, right? Or is there any place that you do or do not feel comfortable with me touching? Those sorts of things that really help folks advocate for themselves when they otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to do so.
Totally. Oh, that's so great. That's so helpful.
Absolutely.
I love that. I'm sorry. I'm like getting like a wave. I'm not feeling super, super great.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Cool. Where do you think you want to go? Where do you think you want to go? Do you want to do the risk factors, resilience factors?
Yeah, we could do that. For sure. I also would be happy to just talk more about like what are things that you wish nurse practitioners knew or were thinking about or something, like just going and I can just talk for a while so you don't have to
That would
worry
be
about
great.
it.
That would be really helpful. I'm really sorry. My brain is actually like, it's like not functioning super well today.
Oh, I feel for you. Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. And then we can totally wrap it up.
Cool. If that's
really
okay
fun.
with you.
Yeah.
That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Of course.
I really don't want to reschedule. I've been so looking forward to this, but I'm like, oh God, now I'm like, ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you want to continue the conversation, if you realize afterwards, you're like, gosh, there's way more we should have talked about.
Yeah.
Schedule another one. It's
Totally.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Okay. Back in. So what, just open-ended question. What do you kind of wish nurse practitioners knew? New grads, students, whatever you'd like to share would be amazing.
We've talked a lot about assumptions and
there is so much assumptions. It's like, that's like right there. One takeaway, don't assume.
Yes, exactly. If there could be one nugget that everyone goes away with. Yeah. So I think I'll reiterate the separation between biological sex, our anatomy and our physiology, our gender identities, our gender expressions, right? And our sexual orientations. If everyone just got on board with that, those are three different things. They don't imply anything about each other. And we could just treat bodies as bodies, not assume gender identity, right? Not assume sexual orientation. Everyone would be better for it. The other piece that I will really name is that I wish that there was more of an understanding of the interconnectedness of mental health and physical health, especially for marginalized communities. So when you provide really affirming care, it creates greater positive mental health outcomes and in turn creates greater positive physical health outcomes. Because the way that our psyches are working directly impacts the neurotransmitters that are available in our bodies, our hormone levels, all of those other things that impact all of our other physiological functions and therefore our physical health outcomes. So I wish that there was less siloing between mental health desires and needs and physical health. Right. So that more of our physical health, our medical providers could see themselves as mental health advocates as well. And that be an underlying non-negotiable around providing affirming care. One of the greatest, pains I've seen in my own career, and also just statistically, is how many LGBTQIA people won't seek
care. It's horrible.
It's horrible. And I think that it only takes one affirming provider to make it more likely that someone seeks care when they need it.
Yeah. For any reason, right? Like any medical care at all, like not necessarily related to anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And when you say affirming care, can you clarify for people what you're referring to?
Yeah. What I mean is that when a patient walks in, they have the experience of feeling seen for who they are, and that no aspect of their gender, their bodies, or their sexual orientation gets pathologized in any sort of way, or othered or marginalized, right?
Yeah.
They feel like their full humanity is welcome there and
Mm.
fundamentally seen by their provider.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in terms of creating, I guess I want to clarify too with creating safe spaces. You've given a lot of great examples of like like in terms of the practicing for people to like language can help like also make that transformation of the brain too. So it's like the using the language of like what terms do you use for your body parts as we're going through, like what what would you say for I'm so sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to keep like multiple things together. Sorry, let me try that again. Oof, I'm actually might have to wrap up. I'm so sorry. I don't feel super well. Maybe we'll just scratch that last question.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry about that. I should have just rescheduled. I just didn't want to lose you. Sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, so wrap up question, and I will get my thoughts together. And I think when I'm more well rested, I'll have more questions to keep together. Okay. So, well, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm sure that I will have a lot more questions. I really wanted us to start this conversation so that I really feel like it's so many people wrote in when I was asking to survey the audience about very tactical things like how do I do hormone replacement therapy, or what about chest binding, and what about screening exams, and a bunch of very like specific medical things, which I think are all amazing and things that I really want to like help address as well in our episodes and our content and all that stuff. But I really feel like this is such a foundational conversation to have, where it's easy, especially for newer nurse practitioners who are so stressed about that role transition and taking excellent care of patients and not making any medical mistakes, that I think that they're apt to want to like jump ahead to that place. But I really do so appreciate us talking about a lot of these foundational aspects, because it's so requisite for all of the other work that we do, because we can learn how to, do hormone therapy or gender affirming hormone therapy and gender affirming care. And also it's just so important to have those other pieces too, like before we even think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the piece I would like to just invite everyone in to is those questions that you have about binding, those questions that you have about STI screening, hormone replacement. Those are things that are out there on the internet with really, really good information. There's specific courses that are, being put together with best practices for hormone replacement therapy, those sorts of things. Go get that education. I think what's really important for me, and the message that I want to leave folks with is asking those probing questions to look inside of ourselves a little bit more, because the internet's not going to do that for you.
Totally. Thank you so much. Where can people learn more about you and take your queer competency course? Actually, if you can tell us a little bit about it too. Is it like a self-paced course? Is it a live course? Like, tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a self-paced course. There is definitely an option to do it on your own time. There's also a couple of different tiers. You don't have to go all in for all the material. There's like an allyship booster pack, which is like, 3 short modules, or the full queer competency course is 8 modules that takes you through all the way from key paradigm shifts, LGBTQI fluency, allyship, best business practices, all the way into like supporting people through transitions, being an advocate for, supportive caregivers and family systems, sex, love, and dating, those sorts of things that are really core competencies for serving the LGBTQIA community. So all of that can be found on my website, can be purchased on your own time. I also run a certification program that happens once a year. Our current cohort is like halfway through, or I send people there. But if you're interested in going deeper in like a 4-month deep dive experience with me, with, group coaching, one-on-one coaching, all of that, the next cohort will be spring of 2023.
Oh, that's so great. Thank you so much for sharing with that. Because I actually thought that you only did the live course. I didn't realize that there was the self-paced one, because I know that a lot of the people that we serve here are really like, that's a huge priority for them, because like it's just a really challenging transition to practice. So time management is a little bit on the challenging side. So I'm so glad to hear that.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what's your website?
www.embodyemerge.com.
Excellent. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.